Come close to the fire, friend. Pull the quilt up over your shoulders and let the room grow soft and dim around you. The kettle is warm. The lamp is low. And tonight, by this small ring of firelight, I am going to tell you the long, gentle story of a tall, quiet man named Abraham Lincoln, the man who, in time, the whole country would come to call President Lincoln. But our story does not begin in any white marble city, or beneath any great dome, or in any room where decisions of state are made. No. Our story begins far from all of that, in a place so plain and so still that you might walk past it on a winter morning and never know that history itself was being born inside. Picture, if you will, a wide rolling country in the heart of old Kentucky. Hardin County, they call it. The hills are low and soft, like sleeping animals beneath a blanket of frost. The streams run slow, and the meadows are tangled with bear grass and broom sedge, all silvered over with a thin breath of ice. Tall poplars stand bare against the sky. A single hawk floats high overhead, very small, very patient. And down below, tucked into a little fold in the land where a clear, cold spring slips quietly away beneath the stones, there sits a small farm. The neighbors call it Sinking Spring Farm on account of that hidden water that seems to disappear into the earth as soon as it is born. It is February the 12th in the year 1809. The morning is cold, the sort of cold that makes the hard ground ring like iron under a boot and turns each breath into a little gray cloud that drifts up and is gone. Snow lies in soft patches in the corners of the split-rail fences. The fences themselves, you must imagine, are made of long oak rails, hand-split by men with axes, stacked one upon the other in a zigzag pattern that wanders along the edges of the fields, like a sleepy snake. Beyond the fences, the woods stretch on for miles, oak and hickory and walnut, dark and quiet, where the deer step softly and the owls have already gone to bed. And in the middle of this quiet frontier world, there stands a single one-room cabin. It is a small thing, this cabin, no bigger than a generous parlor. The walls are made of round, peeled logs, notched at the corners, the chinks between them packed with mud and moss to keep out the wind. There is one door of rough-sawn boards hung on leather hinges. There is one little window, no bigger than a folded shawl, with a square of greased paper instead of glass, glowing the soft yellow of an old honeycomb. The roof is shingled with split clapboards, weighted down with poles. A stone chimney climbs up one end, and from that chimney this morning there rises a slow and steady ribbon of wood smoke, straight and tall in the still air, the way smoke only rises on the very coldest of mornings. Inside, the cabin is warm. A fire of hickory logs burns low on the great open hearth, settling now and then with a soft thump and a little shower of sparks. A black iron kettle hangs on a crane above the coals, breathing a thin curl of steam. The dirt floor has been swept clean and smooth, and a bearskin lies before the fire. There is a rough plank table, 2 three-legged stools, a corner cupboard with a tin cup and a wooden bowl, and against the far wall, a low rope bed piled with patchwork quilts and a husk-filled tick. And on a little shelf, by itself, a single tin lamp burns low, a soft, steady flame no larger than a thumbnail, casting long, kind shadows on the log walls. By that lamp, on that bed of quilts, a young woman is resting. Her name is Nancy. Nancy Hanks Lincoln. She is dark-haired and slender, with eyes that are quiet and far-seeing, the way the eyes of frontier women so often were. And in the curve of her arm, wrapped in a soft homespun blanket, there lies a brand-new baby boy. He has been in this world for only a few hours. His skin is still pink with the newness of life. His tiny hands, no larger than crab apples, are curled into loose little fists. His eyes are closed. His breath is the smallest, softest thing in all of Kentucky. A man stands nearby, watching them, tall, broad-shouldered, with rough carpenter's hands and a kind, weathered face. This is Thomas Lincoln, the father. He does not say very much. He rarely does. He only looks down at his wife and his son, and the fire pops once, softly, on the hearth. And the little tin lamp burns on. Steady, patient, warm, steady, patient, warm. And so it was, in the autumn of 1816, that the little Lincoln family gathered up what they owned and turned their faces north. Thomas Lincoln had grown weary of Kentucky's tangled land titles, of arguing over fence lines a man had cleared with his own two hands, and word had drifted back across the river that Indiana had honest surveys and good timber and soil dark as coffee grounds. So they loaded the wagon, a few iron pots, a spinning wheel, a Bible wrapped in homespun, a little boy of 7 with his sister Sarah beside him, both of them bundled against the chill, watching the only home they had ever known grow small behind the wagon wheels. They came to the Ohio River where it ran wide and slow, the color of weak tea in the late autumn light, and they crossed it on a flat ferry that creaked under the weight of their small lives. On the far bank stood Indiana, a great hush of trees, oak and beech and walnut so thick that a man on horseback could ride a whole day and never lose the shade. Pigeons rose from the branches in clouds. Deer stepped softly through the laurel. The wind moved high up in the canopy with a sound like distant water. The family settled near a quiet stream called Little Pigeon Creek, in a place so deep in the woods that the nearest neighbor was a long shout away. That first winter, they lived in a half-faced camp, 3 walls of logs and a fire burning at the open side, while Thomas swung his axe at the wilderness. Snow fell on the brush roof. The children slept on beds of dry leaves. And the boy Abraham, all elbows and long bare feet, learned that the woods at night are not silent, but full of small, kind sounds. The settling of embers, the breath of a horse in the lean-to, his mother humming low as she stirred the cornmeal mush. He grew in those Indiana woods, the way a young sycamore grows, quickly, quietly, reaching always upward. By 12, he was nearly a man's height. By 14, he could swing an axe from sunup to sundown and never seemed to tire. Folks who saw him split rails said it was a wonder. The long arms rising, the bright blade falling, the white wood opening cleanly along its grain, one rail and another, until a whole length of fence lay stacked beside him in the sweet-smelling chips. He could fell a tree, the neighbors said, faster than any grown man in the settlement, and yet there was no boasting in him. He worked and rested and worked again, and looked at the world with a pair of slow gray eyes that seemed always to be thinking about something very far away. Then came the sorrow. In the autumn of 1818, a strange sickness called the milksick crept through the cabins along Little Pigeon Creek, and his mother Nancy took to her bed. She was a quiet woman, dark-haired and thin, who had taught him his letters by tracing them in the ashes of the hearth. She lingered only a few days. Thomas built her coffin himself, planing the boards by candlelight, and they buried her on a small wooded knoll above the cabin. The boy was 9 years old. For a long while afterward, the cabin was a hushed and lonely place. The cornbread a little drier, the firelight a little thinner, his sister Sarah doing her brave best at a woman's work she was far too young to do. But the Lord, his old grandmother might have said, does not leave the lamp untrimmed forever. The next year, Thomas rode back to Kentucky and returned with a new wife, a kindly widow named Sarah Bush Johnston, and 3 children of her own, and a wagon load of feather beds and pewter dishes and such small comforts as that wilderness had never seen. She came through the cabin door, took one look at the 2 thin, motherless children standing by the hearth, and gathered them in as if they had always been hers. She combed the tangles from Sarah's hair. She washed and mended young Abe's one good shirt. She set him by the fire with a borrowed book and told him, in her soft Kentucky way, to read as long as he liked. And he did. He read by the orange light of pine knots. He read lying flat on the puncheon floor, his long legs stretched toward the embers. Aesop's Fables, Pilgrim's Progress, The Life of Washington, the Bible, again and again, until whole chapters lived inside him like old hymns. Outside, the Indiana night kept its gentle vigil, the great trees breathing, the creek whispering over its stones, an owl calling once, and once again far off in the dark. The years passed the way years pass on a frontier farm, slowly and all at once. The boy who had sounded out his letters by firelight grew tall, then taller, until at last he stood a head above most grown men, lean as a rail and quiet in his bones. His hands had thickened from the axe handle. His shoulders had broadened from the plow. And somewhere in him, without anyone quite seeing it happen, a young man had come into being where a child had been. He was 19 the year the river called him. A neighbor named James Gentry, a man of some means in that corner of Indiana, had a flatboat to send south, and a load of cured pork and yellow corn and sacks of flour to send with it, all the way down to the markets of New Orleans. He needed 2 strong young men to pole and steer her, and his son Allen was one. For the other, he picked the tall, soft-spoken Lincoln boy from down the trace, the one who never seemed to tire and never seemed to complain. And so on a soft spring morning, Abe stepped onto the rough planks of a flatboat for the first time and felt the slow brown water shift beneath his feet, and felt, though he could not yet have named it, the long pull of the country opening out before him. The boat was a simple thing. Just a wooden box with a sweep oar at each end, low to the water, smelling of pine sap and salt pork and river mud. They cast off from the little landing at Rockport, and the Ohio took them gently in hand, the way a grandmother takes a child by the wrist, and led them away. The bluffs slid by in their slow procession. Cottonwoods leaned out over the water, their pale leaves trembling. Cedar smoke drifted from cabin chimneys hidden back in the hollows. Now and then a heron lifted from the shallows on great gray wings and beat away into the willows, and Abe would lean on his sweep and watch it go and say nothing at all. In the evenings they would tie up to a sycamore root, build a small driftwood fire on a sandbar, and cook their supper of cornbread and bacon under a sky so wide and so full of stars that a boy from the Indiana woods could only look up at it and look up and not find the bottom of his looking. The Ohio joined the Mississippi at Cairo, and the river became something else then, broader, browner, more patient, carrying on its slow back the silt of half a continent. Abe felt the change in the boat, in the way she answered the sweep, and the great muscled current that did not hurry and did not pause. He was on the spine of America now, though he did not yet know to call it that. He only knew the river was very old, and very calm and very strong. They drifted past Memphis on its yellow bluff. They drifted past Natchez, with its lanterns climbing the hill at dusk. They drifted past plantations where the cotton was beginning to whiten the fields, and past little wooded islands where deer came down at twilight to drink. And every night the stars came out, and every morning the river mist rose pale off the water, and the flatboat went on, and the young Lincoln went on with it, watching, taking it all in. He saw things on that journey he had never seen before. He saw the wide world doing its wide business. He saw boats of every kind, keelboats and rafts and the great white side-wheelers churning past with their music drifting out over the water. He saw men of every color and every tongue. And outside New Orleans, where the market stood, he saw, for the first time in his quiet life, men and women in chains, and something in him grew very still and remembered. The old French Quarter, when they reached it at last, was a wonder of lanterns and wrought iron and tall masts crowding the levee, of voices in French and Spanish and English, all braided together in the warm Gulf night. They sold their cargo. They sold the boat itself for lumber, the way flatboatmen always did. And then they turned and began the long walk home, 1,200 miles, the way a young man walks when he has just seen the country for the first time and is carrying it home inside him quietly to think about for the rest of his life. When Abe came back from that long walk home, something in him had quietly shifted, the way a river shifts its course in a slow spring thaw. He was 22 years old now, 6'4" in his stocking feet, with arms that had pulled an oar for 1,000 miles, and eyes that had seen a city full of strangers. And so, not long after, he gathered his small bundle of belongings and drifted up the Sangamon River and came to rest in a little prairie village called New Salem, Illinois, a cluster of perhaps 24 log cabins set on a green bluff above the water with a gristmill turning slowly down by the dam. It was the kind of village a tired traveler dreams of finding. There was a cooper, and a blacksmith, and a tavern, and a schoolteacher, and a doctor who also pulled teeth, and one general store with a wooden plank for a counter. And there, in that general store, young Abe Lincoln took his first quiet job behind a counter, measuring out calico and coffee and nails by the pound, and giving back honest change every penny of it, even when it meant walking 3 miles after dark to return 6.25 cents to a woman who had been overcharged. The neighbors began to call him Honest Abe, and the name settled over him gently, the way a good coat settles over a man's shoulders, and he wore it for the rest of his days. When the store, as small frontier stores often did, quietly winked out of business, Abe took up the surveyor's chain and compass. He learned the trade from a borrowed book in 6 weeks, sitting up by candlelight, and then he walked out across the open prairie of Sangamon County, marking off the corners of farms that did not yet exist, drawing straight lines through tall grass and wild plum thickets, so that someday a family could come and call a piece of that grass their own. And in the evenings, when the surveying was done, he would lie on his back beneath a tree, or stretch out on the wooden counter of the post office where he sometimes kept the mail, and he would read. He had come upon a battered copy of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, 4 thick volumes, the great school book of every frontier lawyer in America, and he taught himself the law out of those pages, 1 paragraph at a time, the way a man learns a country by walking across it. He had no teacher. He had no school. He had only the book, and the long, quiet evenings, and a mind that loved to puzzle a thing out until it was clear. By and by he packed up his few books and his few shirts, and he rode the 20 miles down to Springfield, the new state capital, and he hung out his shingle as a country lawyer. Lincoln and Stuart, it read at first, and then, after some years, Lincoln and Logan. And at last, in 1844, Lincoln and Herndon, Billy Herndon, 9 years younger, fiery and bookish and devoted, who would be his law partner to the very end, and who never once, in all those years, took the sign down. Their office was a plain upstairs room above a store, with a long table, a wood stove, a horsehair sofa, where Abe liked to lie full length and read the newspapers aloud, and a stack of papers that grew like a small drift of snow in the corner. And twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, Abe would close up that office, and he would ride. He rode the 8th Judicial Circuit of Illinois, 14 counties, 500 miles of muddy roads and frozen creeks and prairie taverns, for 10 or 12 weeks at a stretch. He rode an old horse named Old Buck, with a faded green umbrella under his arm, and a worn carpet bag tied behind the saddle holding a couple of clean shirts and a razor and a Bible. And on his head he wore that famous tall stovepipe hat, and inside the hat, tucked up under the crown, he carried his letters, his pencil stubs, and the folded papers of every case he was riding to argue. In the long evenings, in country taverns where 6 lawyers slept in 2 beds, Abe would sit by the fire and tell stories until the room rocked with laughter, and then grow suddenly quiet and stare into the coals and think his own long, quiet thoughts about the country and the law and what was coming. But of course, the circuit was only half of his life in those middle years. The other half, the warmer half, waited for him at the end of a long ride home, in a quiet town called Springfield, on a corner where 2 ordinary streets crossed each other under the elm trees. 8th and Jackson. That was the address. A plain, comfortable house of brown clapboards and green shutters, 2 stories tall, with a little picket fence in front and a small barn out back where Old Buck could rest his bones and chew his hay. It was not a grand house. It was not the house of a senator or a banker. It was the house of a country lawyer who had done well enough to give his family a parlor with a horsehair sofa, and a kitchen with a good iron stove, and bedrooms upstairs, where the children slept under quilts their mother had pieced by lamplight. He had married her 10 years before, in the autumn of 1842, in the parlor of her sister's home in Springfield, on a rainy November evening. Her name was Mary Todd, and she was a small, bright, quick-witted woman from Kentucky, with dark hair and blue eyes and a love of poetry and a temper like a thunderstorm in summer, sudden and short and washed clean by the sun. She had grown up in a fine house in Lexington, with servants and silver and lessons in French. He had grown up in a one-room log cabin with a dirt floor, and yet they had found each other in the candlelit drawing rooms of Springfield society, and Mary, who could have married any well-bred gentleman in Illinois, had chosen the tall, awkward, melancholy young lawyer with the kind gray eyes. She always said she had married him because she believed, deep in her heart, that he would one day be president. Their wedding ring was a plain gold band, and inside it, Abraham had asked the jeweler to engrave 3 small words: "Love is eternal." By the time we sit with them at the hearth, in the gentle decade of the 1850s, 4 little boys had come into that house on 8th and Jackson. Robert, the eldest, sober and serious, already growing into a thoughtful young man bound for college. Eddie, the second, sweet and frail, who had slipped quietly away as a small child, and whose memory lay tender and unspoken in his mother's prayers. And then Willie, gentle and bright, with his father's slow smile and his mother's quick mind. And little Tad, the youngest, lisping and laughing, full of mischief, who could climb into his father's lap at any hour and find welcome there. Oh, what a parlor it was on a winter Sunday afternoon. The beeswax candles in their pewter holders throwing soft golden light onto the rose-patterned wallpaper. The horsehair sofa creaking comfortably under the weight of a tall lawyer stretched out at full length in his stocking feet, with one of the boys tumbling over his long legs. The coal fire glowing in the small grate. The smell of Sunday roast drifting in from the kitchen. Beef and onions and potatoes, and the warm, sweet smell of an apple pie cooling on the windowsill. The mantel clock ticking. The kettle humming. The cat asleep on the hearth rug. Mary moved through those rooms in a rustle of silk and lavender water, arranging flowers in a glass vase, plumping the cushions, calling the boys to wash their hands. She set a fine table when she could, with her good Kentucky china and her mother's silver spoons, and she liked to invite Mr. Lincoln's circuit-riding friends to supper, and pour them tea, and listen to their stories with her clever, attentive eyes. And he, the father of that house, would lie down on the parlor rug after Sunday dinner, in his shirt sleeves, with his vest unbuttoned, and let the children climb upon him as if he were a mountain. He would read to them from the family Bible and from Aesop, and from a battered copy of Shakespeare in his slow, fond prairie voice. He would carry little Tad on his shoulders down to the post office for the evening mail, the boy waving his small hands at the lamplighters going by with their long poles. And in the soft hours after the children were asleep, he and Mary would sit by the parlor fire, just the two of them, and she would do her sewing, and he would read aloud from a newspaper or a book of poems, and the coals would settle in the grate with a small glad sigh, and outside the windows the snow would be falling, very gently, on the quiet streets of Springfield, Illinois. But the wider world, of course, did not stay outside the Springfield windows forever. It came shouldering in the way a long prairie wind comes in, slow and sure, smelling of distant rain. And so we stepped now, very gently, out of the parlor and onto a wooden bandstand in the warm, dusty summer of 1858. It is the year of the great debates. Abraham Lincoln, the country lawyer, has been chosen by the new Republican Party of Illinois to stand against the most famous man in the state, Senator Stephen A. Douglas, the little giant, short and broad-shouldered and quick of tongue, riding from town to town in a private railway car with a small brass cannon on the rear platform that boomed out his arrival. Lincoln, by contrast, travels on the regular trains in a single black coat with a carpet bag and a stovepipe hat, and steps down at each depot like any other tall, tired traveler come in for the county fair. There will be 7 debates in all, scattered like 7 lamps across the great map of Illinois. Ottawa, in the cool north. Freeport, up near the Wisconsin line, with its hayfields and its German farmers. Jonesboro, far down in the cypress country of Egypt, where the Mississippi mists drift in at dawn. Charleston, on the gentle Embarrass River. Galesburg, by the new little college on the prairie. Quincy, looking westward across the broad brown river. And Alton, last of all, on the Mississippi bluffs, with the steamboats coughing softly at the wharf. Imagine, if you would, a small Illinois town on debate day. The square is hung with red, white, and blue bunting. A wooden platform has been built just that morning by the local carpenters, and it smells still of fresh sawn pine. A brass band, a little out of tune, plays Hail Columbia on the courthouse steps. Farmers have come in from 20 miles around in wagons and buggies and on horseback, with their wives in calico and their children in clean Sunday clothes. There are jugs of lemonade under the maple trees and slabs of pie on long boards, and the warm, comfortable smell of harness leather and horse and trampled grass. And there, climbing up onto the platform with that long, careful, slightly stooping walk, is Mr. Lincoln. He is 6 feet 4 inches tall in his stockings, and taller still in his stovepipe hat, and his black coat hangs a little loose on his thin frame. His face is plain and weathered, with deep lines at the eyes from much smiling and much sorrow. He nods to the crowd in his shy, kindly way, and a great cheer goes up from the farmers, who know him as one of their own. Then comes Senator Douglas, in a fine ruffled shirt and a polished waistcoat, every inch the statesman, and the cheers rise up for him as well, for he is much loved in Illinois. The rules are gentle and clear. One man speaks for an hour. The other answers for an hour and a half. And the first man closes for half an hour more. 3 full hours under the open sky, with the September sun moving slowly across the platform and the shadows of the elm leaves shifting on the planks. Douglas speaks first, often, in a strong, ringing baritone, full of confidence and old senatorial polish. And then Lincoln rises, and there is a small hush, for his voice is not what they expected. It is high, and it is thin, and it carries far in the prairie air. A tall, slow, kindly voice that reaches the grandmother on the back bench as clearly as the boy in the front. He speaks in the plain talk of country people, with stories from the law courts and verses from the Bible, and now and then a small, soft joke that makes the whole crowd laugh together, like one warm family in a country church. The great question between them, the deep and aching question, is the question of slavery in the new Western territories. Douglas would let each territory choose for itself. Lincoln would hold the line and let slavery go no further, trusting in the long, patient work of time. Hour upon hour, town upon town, the two men carry that question across Illinois, and the children sit on their fathers' shoulders to see, and the school teachers take careful notes, and the newspapermen scribble in their little books by the light of kerosene lanterns, and the words travel out by telegraph to Boston and New York and far-off Washington, where, by and by, a quiet nation begins, very slowly, to listen. And though Mr. Lincoln does not win that Senate seat in the autumn of 1858, for the legislature, in those days, still does the choosing, and they choose Mr. Douglas. The words he has spoken do not fall to the ground. So when the new young Republican Party gathers in May of 1860 in the city of Chicago, they have already begun, without quite knowing it, to think his name. They build for the convention a great wooden hall by the lake, hastily hammered together out of fresh pine boards, and they call it, in their plain Western way, the wigwam. 10,000 people crowd inside it. The galleries sway. The rafters smell of new sap. Outside, banners snap in the prairie wind, and brass bands play, and boys sell roasted peanuts from paper cones, and the long blue lake rolls quietly beyond the rooftops. Most of the country that spring expects the nomination to go to Mr. Byance. Seward of New York, a polished senator, a famous man, a man with marble busts already made of him. And on the first ballot, indeed, Mr. Seward leads. But on the second ballot, the numbers shift gently, the way a quiet wind shifts a field of wheat. And on the third ballot, around noon, with the hall holding its breath, the chairman rises and announces, in a voice that trembles a little, that the prairie lawyer from Springfield, Illinois, has been chosen. The wigwam erupts. Hats fly into the air. A cannon on the rooftop fires a great booming salute over the lake. And down in Springfield, Mr. Lincoln is sitting in the office of the Asterisk Illinois State Journal in his shirt sleeves, waiting for the telegraph, and he walks home in the spring sunshine to tell Mary. The campaign that follows is a long one. Mr. Lincoln, as is the old custom, does not travel. He stays in Springfield. He sits in a borrowed room in the state capitol, and he answers letters, and he greets visitors, and he lets the young men of the party do the speaking. All summer and all autumn the country argues, in barns and on courthouse steps, by torchlight and by daylight, until at last, in November, the votes come in, and the prairie lawyer is elected the 16th President of the United States. And then comes the long, slow goodbye. On a gray February morning in 1861, with a cold rain falling, Mr. Lincoln stands on the rear platform of a railway car at the little Springfield depot. His neighbors are gathered close, hundreds of them, their breath rising white in the air. He takes off his stovepipe hat. He looks at the faces he has known for 25 years. The storekeeper, the blacksmith, the boys who used to wrestle him behind the courthouse, and he says in that soft, high voice of his, "My friends, no one not in my situation can appreciate my feeling of sadness at this parting." And the train whistle blows, and the wheels begin to turn, and Springfield slips away behind him into the rain. For 12 days the train rolls eastward, slowly, slowly through the winter country. Indianapolis, Cincinnati, where they stand in the snow to see him. Columbus, Pittsburgh, where the river steams in the cold. Cleveland, by the gray edge of Erie. Buffalo, Albany. Hour upon hour, the locomotive breathes its plume of black smoke into the white February sky, and at every depot, every little water stop, every crossroads town, the people are waiting. Farmers in long coats, mothers holding up babies, boys perched on fence rails, and Mr. Lincoln steps out onto the back platform and tips his tall hat and says a few quiet words and waves, and the train rolls on. He is 52 years old. He is going to a city he has hardly seen, to a house he has never lived in, to a war that has not yet quite begun. The lamps in the railway car burn low. The windows fog with his breath, and outside, the long American countryside lies sleeping under its February snow, mile after mile, waiting for what will come. And so the train arrives, as trains always do, in the soft gray hours of a Washington morning. The Capitol is muddy. The unfinished dome of the Capitol stands against the sky like a half-told prayer. And up the long avenue, past the soldiers and the carriages and the slow-moving river of strangers, there waits for him a great white house with tall windows and lamps already lit against the winter dark. He moves into it quietly. He brings his books and his shawl and his good wife Mary and the boys, Robert nearly grown, Willie with his soft brown hair, and little Tad with his lisp and his laughter. The hallways are long, the ceilings are high, and above the family rooms the gas jets hiss their gentle blue-white song, a sound that will follow him now through every room, through every season, through every long and burdened year. The war comes. Of course the war comes. We have already heard the cannon at Sumter, far to the south, and the country has begun to weep. But here, in the upstairs of the executive mansion, the days settle into a rhythm so quiet it almost seems peaceful. He rises early. He shaves at a small mirror by the window. He pulls on his black coat and his great heavy boots and walks down to the office where the maps are spread, and the generals come and go, and the telegrams arrive in their thin yellow envelopes from the War Department across the South Lawn. Often, at night, when the house has gone still, he cannot sleep. So he rises in his long nightshirt, and he wraps himself in an old gray shawl, and he puts on his carpet slippers, soft, worn, faithful, and he walks. Down the long second-floor hall he goes, past the closed doors of his sleeping family, past the portraits of the presidents who came before him, past the tall windows where the moon lays its silver across the polished floor. And the gas lamps burn low, and his shadow walks beside him, and the great old house breathes around him like something kindly and alive. Sometimes he carries a little candle out across the south lawn, in the small hours, to the War Department telegraph office. The grass is wet. The stars are very bright. And inside the warm small room, the young operators rise to their feet when they see him, and he waves them back, and he sits in the chair by the clattering keys, and he waits, patient as a country lawyer, for word from Virginia, from Tennessee, from the cold rivers where his armies are sleeping in their tents. When the news is good, he allows himself a small, tired smile. When the news is bad, he folds the paper in half, and he folds it again, and he tucks it into the pocket over his heart, and he walks the long way back to the house through the dew. And in the upstairs library, through the long, hot summer of 1862, he begins to write. The window is open. A faint breeze stirs the muslin curtains. On the marble desk before him, there are sheets of pale blue paper, and a steel pen, and an inkwell, and a Bible that has traveled with him since boyhood. He writes a sentence. He crosses it out. He writes it again. He gets up. He walks to the window. He looks out across the river toward the hills of Virginia, where the great sad camps glow with their 1,000 fires. Then he comes back, and he sits down, and he writes a little more. It will be called the Emancipation Proclamation. But on these warm summer nights it is only ink and breath, and the slow, careful work of a tired man at a quiet desk, trying to set something right. He has small mercies, even now. Tad climbs into his lap during cabinet meetings, and he does not put him down. A wounded boy is brought to the east room, and he kneels beside the cot, and he lays his great rough hand on the boy's forehead, and he says only, "Thank you." And late at night, when the house has at last grown still, he kneels by his bed in the lamplight. The shawl is around his shoulders. The slippers are at his feet. The great war waits beyond the window. And he bows his long, sorrowful head, and he says a small, quiet prayer that no one will ever hear, except, perhaps, the gentle gaslight, burning low and faithful all through the long American night. And the long American night turns slowly, friend, the way nights do on this old continent, quietly, without hurry, one star at a time. The autumn comes. The leaves on the maples along the Potomac turn the color of a banked fire, gold and soft red, and the wind that runs down out of the hills smells of wood smoke and apples and the far-off camps of soldiers. And in November of 1863, the President of the United States packs a small carpet bag, and he climbs aboard a special train, and he rides north through the Maryland farmland to a little Pennsylvania town called Gettysburg. You may have heard of it. 4 months earlier, on the long ridges and in the wheat fields just outside that town, 2 great armies met for 3 terrible days, and when at last the guns fell silent, the fields were hushed and changed forever. And now, in the soft gray light of a November afternoon, the people of Pennsylvania have gathered on a hillside above those fields to dedicate a quiet cemetery for the soldiers who lay sleeping there. The President stands on a small wooden platform. The wind tugs gently at his black coat. There is a great speaker who has come before him, a famous orator named Edward Everett, and that good gentleman has spoken for 2 full hours in the grand rolling style of the time, and the crowd has listened patiently, the way people did in those long ago afternoons. And then it is the President's turn. He rises. He puts on his small steel spectacles. He takes from his pocket 2 pages of paper, and he speaks, friend, for barely 2 minutes. 272 soft, plain words in that high, gentle Kentucky voice. And when he is done, some in the crowd hardly know that he is finished, and the applause is scattered and uncertain, the way applause is when a thing is too quiet to be measured all at once. "Fourscore and 7 years ago," he says, "a new nation, conceived in liberty, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." And then he sits down, and the wind moves through the bare trees on the hillside, and somewhere a horse stamps softly in the cold grass. And the country, friend, the whole tired country, does not yet know that it has just been given a thing it will keep forever. The 2 minutes settle slowly over the land. They settle the way snow settles on a roof, without fuss, without thunder, just a soft and patient covering of everything. And in the weeks that follow, the words begin to be reprinted in the little newspapers of Ohio and Vermont and Iowa, and people read them by their own kitchen lamps in the evening, and they fold the page, and they put it carefully into the family Bible, alongside the births and the marriages and the names of the boys who did not come home. And the long war goes on. Another winter, another spring. The candles burn lower in the upstairs library. The cabinet meets and meets again. The telegraph clicks through the night. And then it is the 4th of March in the year 1865, and the war is almost done. A damp morning in Washington City. The streets are muddy from a slow rain, and a thin gray sky hangs low over the dome of the new Capitol, which has only just been finished, with its tall white statue of freedom standing quiet on the very top. A great crowd has gathered at the east front. Soldiers and senators and old farmers in from Virginia, and black men and women, free now, friend, free at last, standing together in the wet grass to hear the president speak again. He comes out onto the high portico. He looks tired. He looks older than his years. And just as he begins to speak, the clouds part. The people will remember this all their lives. And a single shaft of soft sunlight falls upon his long, sorrowful face. With malice toward none. With charity for all. With firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in. To bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan. And the crowd is hushed, friend. The great damp crowd is hushed. The war is almost over. The long night is almost over, and the gentle benediction drifts out across the muddy avenues of Washington like a hand laid softly on a fevered brow. Sleep on, old country. Sleep on. And so we come, dear listener, to a warm spring evening in Washington. Good Friday, the 14th of April, 1865. The magnolias along the avenues are just beginning to bloom. The war is over. The flags hang easy in the soft, mild air. And the president, who has carried so much for so long, has decided he would like, at last, to laugh a little. He puts on the long black coat and the tall silk hat. Mary takes his arm. They climb into the carriage, and the wheels turn slowly through the gathering dusk toward 10th Street, where the gas lamps of Ford's Theater glow yellow against the brick. Inside, the orchestra is tuning. The audience is in a holiday mood. The play is a comedy, Our American Cousin, the kind of light, foolish thing a tired man brings his wife to when he wants only to forget the weight of the world for a few hours. They are shown up the curving staircase to Box 7, dressed up that night with flags and a framed engraving of George Washington. A rocking chair has been set out for the president. Just for him. He settles into it with a quiet sigh. Mary sits close beside him and tucks her hand into his. Below them, the footlights flicker. The curtain rises, and for a little while, a precious little while, Abraham Lincoln laughs, and Mary laughs with him, and the long shadow of 4 bitter years lifts gently from the room. Then, dear listener, comes the moment we will pass over softly, as one passes a sleeping child's door, without lingering, without noise. There is a sharp sound the audience does not understand. There is a man on the stage who should not be there. And when the people in the box turn toward the president, they find him slumped a little in his rocking chair, his eyes closed, as though he has only drifted into a quiet thought. They carry him out, very tenderly, down the narrow stair, out into the night air of 10th Street, where a great hush has fallen upon the crowd. And so they bring him in. The Petersen house is a small brick boarding house, plain as a country church. They lay him down in a back bedroom on a narrow walnut bed. He is so tall that they have to angle him across the mattress, his stockinged feet hanging off the end. Someone draws up a quilt. Someone lights a single oil lamp on the bureau, and the long, hushed watch begins. All through the night, dear listener, they come and go. Cabinet members in their dark coats, doctors with their gentle hands, Robert, the eldest son, kneeling at his father's side, Mary, in the front parlor, weeping the soft, exhausted weeping of a heart that has already lost 2 children and cannot quite believe it must lose this one too. Outside, the rain begins to fall, a slow, soft April rain, the kind that taps at the window like a memory asking to be let in. The lamp burns low. The clock on the mantel ticks and ticks and ticks. Now and again someone leans close to listen to his breathing, that great, slow, weary breathing, and lays a cool cloth upon his brow. He never wakes. He never speaks. He only rests at long last in the deep, quiet country of sleep. And as the gray light of Saturday morning begins to pearl the window panes, his breathing grows softer. Softer. Softer still. At 22 minutes past 7 o'clock, in the gentle glow of that single bedside lamp, Abraham Lincoln draws one last small breath and lets it go, and is still. The room is very quiet. Outside, a church bell begins to toll, and another, until all the bells of Washington are ringing in the soft spring rain. Mr. And so, dear listener, our story ends not with a thunderclap, but with a sigh. A boy from a one-room cabin on Sinking Spring Farm. A barefoot reader by the embers. A rail splitter, a flatboatman, a country lawyer with a stovepipe hat full of papers. A president who carried a torn nation in his great sad heart and laid it down at last in a little back bedroom on 10th Street by the light of a single quiet lamp. Sleep well, mister. Lincoln. Sleep well, old friend. And sleep well, dear listener. Sleep well.